Okay, that was very quick. Any questions?
It's very rich, Tim. Have you? I don't know if you've probably been talking, so not really been following the chat online.
I
Um,
did see that there was a lot of activity, but I didn't want to divert my attention till I was done.
but if I can invite people just to see if there's a couple of questions at this point, just to clarify what Tim said. I'll need to go and move on and briefly compare and contrast and get the debate going as to how big can align with this. Is there anyone got a question or two on clarity so far?
Not a
Please
question.
just
I'm just genuinely surprised that Tim has found this such a rich niche to exploit because, yeah, I think everybody just assumed it was a given that this was in place or it should be in place. I don't think anybody's interrogated the question in quite the same way.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. And I have to be the first to admit, the last 2 years, it's ChatGPT. It's called my digital twin. I've always held these beliefs, and if you went to my website, you could see articles that I wrote in 1990. You could see articles that I wrote in 2000. You could see the same philosophy, but the richness of the evidence that supports and the psychological reasons why don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome is the operating governance approach in the world. As ironic as it seems, with all of the effort in governance codes, it is the operational, it is, I have labeled it the number one flaw. And I'll be the first, I'd be willing to admit it was AI that coined don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. It took what I was saying and said, well, Tim, it's clear this is what the problem is. Well, I knew it was the problem, but it came up with the don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. Then it did psychological analysis why management doesn't want to tell the board, why boards don't want to ask, why the root of all of the major governance disasters in history come back to don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. So there is huge evidence that supports. Now, I don't have the bandwidth to go and look at every listed public company on every major exchange in 12 countries that AI did for me, but it went out and said, no, it found 4 companies that the board looked like it kind of disclosed the purpose of the board. That's after looking at major stock exchanges all over the world and every company listed on them. It's coming up with a tiny list of companies where the board, who everybody acknowledges is the fundamental rudder of governance, don't have disclosed purpose statements. I see other hands.
Chris was first with his hand, then Philip.
Yeah, I think you're right, and what I've seen in work in strategy implementation is many organizations that are not, or in the past, 20 years ago, were not including risk along with their strategic performance against objectives. Yes, they knew their objectives, and yes, they were maybe cascading those well down the organization, but they weren't necessarily including risk with that. But in more modern times, we see much more of that being included with people's strategic performance assessments as they include the level of risk and the risks around those specific objectives. So I think it is changing. And I think we also need to not just look at listed companies, because that's maybe the minority of companies out there. That we also need to consider every organization, not just listed ones, when we talk about this.
No, you make a good point, Chris. And one of the things that is obvious is when a VC swoops in and buys out all of the shares and delists a public company, one of the first steps that VCs tend to do is put their own CEO in. That step by itself immediately disables the don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. The CEO is now the person the shareholders have hired, explicitly hired, and none of it needs to be disclosed in public filings. So VCs can step around the don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. Um, Private companies, owner operated, founding owner, often they don't have the don't tell, don't ask governance syndrome. Unless the founder doesn't want to tell the quote independent board directors the real truth, which happens. But private companies, you're totally correct. The methodology, I have used it on everything from humane societies to Society for Deaf and Blind to Campus Crusade for Christ. Any entity at any size in any sector, these concepts of mission critical objectives and acceptable uncertainty are totally applicable. Um, so it for sure it doesn't apply. It's just that my research is focused on the publicly listed because that's where we might see regulatory intervention happen first. Other questions?
Philip was next.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Tim, thank you for that. That's been really interesting. I'm like you. I came out of my last business into the AI spectre about 8 years ago, and my initial direction, I'm very much business AI rather than the personal stuff with ChatGPT, etc. However, one of the early bits that I picked up on was building a concept called a digital twin of an organization. So it's actually gathering all the objects. So that's why I keep going. The problem is that most people, I'm talking to the CEOs, most people can tell me what the organization looks like. They probably can tell me what the strategy is, but very rarely can they ever tell me what the purpose is. And I kind of go back and say, well, if you don't know what the purpose is, then the organization might be churning the wrong piece of the pond and actually not achieving anything that we're wanting to get to. So that led me down into this sort of DTO environment where one can put, with you start off with your MCOs, and I'm sorry I had to ask David what an MCO was in the beginning because I'm not very good at all these acronyms. So I can say this is the MCO. This is we define it as being achieving this, and it's led by this, and the strategy linked to it is this. The risks that are associated with us not achieving this are the following ones. We've got the following controls in place, which we measure in this way, and this meets our compliance requirements. And then you take that on down to who's the really important bit is who's accountable for this and who's responsible for achieving it and getting that wrap around.
Yeah.
And that led me over the last 2 years into a concept where I took the DTO and I said, right, I'm calling it now a digital twin of the digital business brain of an organization, because AI has moved on so fast that actually to start pulling together that business know-how that says, this is what we do, this is how we do it, not just the reports on whether we've made money or not made money, but what information is Fred carrying in his head? And when Fred's not around, who do we ask how to do things? And which of these things that we do are actually adding to the achievement of the purpose, and which, again, are just churning mud in the pond. And I firmly believe that if we can start getting to that environment, then that addresses both. The board say we need to have this digital brain, which allows us in real time to go and say, what's our KPIs? What are the KPIs? What are all the and MCOs? What are the risks and how are they coming out to play and who's doing what about them? And maybe I should be using my AI tool to read this and say, tell Tim that these are the people that we need to talk to, and we need to pull these heads into the same room and ask them questions on behalf of the shareholders.
Yeah,
I'm not selling a piece of software because I don't think anyone's ever going to write a piece of software that does that. But the concept of building that bespoke tool for your business, it's a no-brainer to me, and irrespective of whether OpenAI goes bust or not.
Yeah, and people are grasping that. I mean, groups that have had 20, 30 people in risk management that produce the risk map and the risk register. AI can reproduce what some of those 20, 30 people do in 15, 10 minutes, and it's better than what they've been producing. So it needs a methodology that harnesses both the ability of AI, but also recognizes in the end, it has to be human beings, the management and the board, that decide how much uncertainty is okay. And we can make that data set richer. We can make it incredibly granular and useful. But your question, Philip, about the term is a good one. Just to give you some context, the reason for mission critical objectives comes from the US courts. So, as directors have been sued for being negligent, over the last 15 years, the US court, in specific the Chancery Court in Delaware, has coined the term mission critical. So these are court decisions saying, yeah, director, you have a lot of latitude about what you do and how you do it, but we, the court, have decided that your fiduciary duty of care says you need to oversee mission critical areas and risk. So the term mission critical comes from the US courts deciding boards are not there to manage, they're there to oversee, but the standard of care is not very clear. What does oversee a corporation mean? So when you look at your business law in the UK and your incorporation statutes and all of the things that govern public and private companies, they set out what a board should do, but most of what they set out is things that boards should do, not why. So
Yeah.
there is very little clarity on why. So the term mission critical, I'm sensitive to the fact that it is an acronym. I usually say mission critical dash top strategic value creation and value preservation objectives. Those terms, I hope, are more understandable than mission critical objectives. But there is a very strategic reason to coin them mission critical because those are the only objectives the courts have said boards must oversee these.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they don't have
I
to
think
oversee
the term
everything.
mission critical objective is pretty self-declarative. It was the MCO that caught me in your early slides,
Yeah, no,
and I'd missed it.
that's
I don't know
true.
why.
Well, usually when I'm writing about it, I put it in brackets and
Yeah.
quotation marks once, and then I try to save space.
No, I think it's brilliant.
But
It's a good concept.
yeah, no, it's an ongoing problem of not. What does MCO mean? Well, fair enough. I defined it 7 paragraphs above, so that
That takes me back to stage one of your digital business brain, which is your business glossary, in which you define every single term, every single metric, every single you name it, because AI can't work without a language layer. It's got to have a contextual layer to actually be able to work within a business. Otherwise, it's going to come back with so-called hallucinations, which
Well,
can give it
sadly,
weird.
I'm a litigation forensic accountant as well, and when you go to a contract dispute, the first thing you end up doing is going into the definition of what does that word mean that we're arguing about and spending $3 million in legal fees fighting over.
Yeah.
So the notion of defined terms in contracts and trying to define them in order to reduce the confusion is important, but it's still we're human beings. Now, sadly, my ability to remember what was 2 pages before may not be crystal perfect. I asked AI to review 600 LinkedIn posts that I've published over the last 7 years and give me a 2 page summary. It can do it, and it did it in 30 seconds.
Well, that's what the Panama Papers was all about.
Yeah.
That's the
So
most visual, incredible achievement of all so far.
Well, guys, this definition of terms is quite vital, and with the big stuff we've written, there's a section which is to define terms. I think we do need to be able to define some terms. I don't think there are terms that everyone innately understands about everything. So I think when you want to talk about a subject, it doesn't hurt, and I think it's allowable to define your own terms and talk about it those ways. So. It's just whether people have got the energy or not to try and absorb any new terms when they only really want to use their own. Because
I think, David, the point is that as you move forward and you get more intelligent data interpretation tools where you write something in your, or talk to it, or whichever one you want, but you communicate with this brain and you say, can you tell me how many widgets we've sold and how many new customers we've got in the last 3 weeks? It can't go off to get it can maybe work out what a widget is, but it can't go off and work out what a customer is, because that's unique to every business. It's also unique to every
Yeah.
part of the business, because sales, marketing, they all have different definitions of a customer.
Yeah,
And that's what I
Philip,
mean is that to get to
you'll
that
be
layer, you've got to define it.
you'll
And
be
only
amused,
human AI will do
Philip.
it. Sorry.
Yesterday I asked AI. I asked the question, if 1,000 board chairs of U.S. listed public companies were asked, does the board oversee mission critical objectives and the risk and uncertainties of achieving them? What would the responses be? And then I said, give me what the responses would be from 10 different AI agents to this exact question.
Yeah.
And so that'll be one of my posts next week. It's quite fascinating. We have the diplomat AI, we have the empiricist AI, we have the realist AI. Depends
But
on
that,
how they've been programmed
but
in
Tim,
terms.
what's really important is if HSBC want to be able to do this, they need to have the HSBC AI that tells them what this means within HSBC. It's
Yeah,
irrelevant what it
Yeah.
means
Yeah.
to Barclays Bank down the road. It's what it
Yeah.
means to us.